In this podcast episode, the hosts welcome journalist Charlie Peters to discuss the harrowing issue of grooming gangs in the UK. Peters has been investigating this crisis for years, shedding light on the systemic failures that allow such abuse to persist. The conversation delves into the nature of grooming gangs, the demographics of both perpetrators and victims, and the societal and institutional failures that contribute to this ongoing tragedy. Peters begins by defining grooming gangs as groups involved in localized child sexual exploitation, a form of child abuse that has been documented in various forms since the 1960s in the UK. He highlights that these gangs predominantly consist of South Asian men, particularly from Pakistani backgrounds, who target vulnerable white working-class girls. The conversation traces the origins of this issue back to the early 2000s, when reports begin to surface about Pakistani men grooming schoolgirls outside their schools. Despite the alarming nature of these reports, those who raise concerns, such as former Labour MP Ann Cryer, face severe backlash and accusations of racism, effectively silencing the discussion for years. Peters recounts the pivotal role of journalist Andrew Norfolk, who, after initially dismissing the grooming gang narrative as a far-right fantasy, uncovers the extensive abuse occurring in towns like Rotherham. His investigations reveal that between 1997 and 2013, approximately 1,400 girls are abused in Rotherham alone, with many more victims likely unaccounted for across the country. Peters emphasizes that the abuse is not only horrific, but is also actively ignored by authorities, including social workers and police, who prioritize community cohesion over justice for the victims. The discussion turns to the systemic failures within law enforcement and local authorities. Peters points out that many officials turn a blind eye to the abuse, often due to misogynistic and racist attitudes towards the victims, who are seen as part of the underclass. He describes how police officers and social workers fail to investigate reports of abuse and, in some cases, are complicit in the cover-up. The lack of accountability for these officials remains a significant barrier to justice for the victims. Peters also highlights the inadequacy of previous inquiries into the grooming gang crisis, such as the Alexis J. report, which fails to address the broader patterns of abuse and the cultural factors at play. He criticizes the government for not conducting a comprehensive national inquiry, which he believes is necessary to uncover the full extent of the problem and hold those responsible accountable. A significant part of the conversation focuses on the cultural and demographic factors that contribute to the grooming gang phenomenon. Peters explains that the Pakistani community in the UK has a history of clannishness, which can create a sense of loyalty and honor among its members. This cultural dynamic, combined with derogatory views towards white women, fosters an environment where the abuse of vulnerable girls is normalized. Peters argues that this issue is not merely a product of religion, but is deeply rooted in cultural attitudes and practices, such as cousin marriage, which can perpetuate harmful behaviors. The discussion also touches on the statistics surrounding grooming gangs, with Peters revealing that between 1997 and 2016, 1 in every 2,200 Muslim men over the age of 16 in the UK is prosecuted for group-based child sexual exploitation. In areas like Rotherham, the figure is even more alarming, with 1 in 73 Pakistani men facing prosecution. These statistics underscore the systemic nature of the problem and challenge the narrative that grooming gangs are an isolated issue. As the conversation progresses, Peters expresses his frustration with the lack of accountability for perpetrators and the systemic failures that allow this crisis to continue. He highlights the leniency of sentences given to offenders, often resulting in minimal prison time for heinous crimes. Peters argues that the justice system prioritizes the rights of perpetrators over those of victims, further perpetuating the cycle of abuse. Peters calls for a national inquiry into grooming gangs, emphasizing the need for a comprehensive investigation that addresses the cultural, demographic, and systemic factors at play. He believes that only through such an inquiry can the truth be uncovered and justice be served for the countless victims who suffer in silence.